We are Reno High's Unit 2. My name is Nicole Blangus, and I will be headed to the University of Southern California.
My name is Michael Huang. I'll be going to the University of Denver.
My name is Brooke Erickson. I was waitlisted by Stanford, so no one knows what's going to happen next.
My name is Trevor Livingston, and I will be attending Middlebury College.
My name is Reagan Dreiling, and I might be attending Willamette University. Nice. And I'm unit coach? Oh yeah, I'm our unit coach. The whole last team did good. Our unit coach is Lieutenant Colonel Scott Marriott, and our teacher is Mr. Richard.
All right, Unit 2 for Reno High School. Question 2. Why do you think the framers provided for the Constitution to be ratified by special ratifying conventions rather than by state legislatures? What is the relationship, if any, of the ratification conventions to social contract theory and to natural rights philosophy? What were the major disagreements between the two blocs that aligned themselves against one another during the ratification debates? Again.
During South Africa's struggle against apartheid, a powerful rallying cry developed, in which the leader of a cause would shout to the crowd, "Amandla," and the people would respond, "Awegu." Combined, this phrase means power to the people. The struggle to place power in the people's hands has long been felt throughout history.
In 1787, as the Articles of Confederation were crumbling in the United States, delegates to the Philadelphia Convention proclaimed Amandla by crafting the Constitution, and the public responded "Awegu" by electing delegates to ratify the document. In a sweeping attempt to remove power from the inefficient Confederation Congress, the framers relocated that authority to the people by granting them the opportunity to engage in a social contract and determine their own form of government.
The delegates to the Philadelphia Convention delineated in Article 7 the ratification of the conventions of the United States shall be sufficient for the establishment of this Constitution between states so ratifying the same. The delegates understood that the adoption of the Constitution would mean the acquiescence of certain state liberties, such as the powers to regulate tariffs, determine the value of paper money, and reject Congress's request for funds. State legislatures were not likely to ratify a constitution that eliminated these rights, so the framers attempted to circumvent them.
Instead, they established ratification conventions to place sovereignty in the people's hands, which reflected John Locke's social contract theory, as the Constitution was to be ordained and established by the people. Popularly elected delegates in conventions choosing to ratify the Constitution effectively entered the people into a social contract with the national government.
Thomas Paine's The Rights of Man also heavily justified this political revolution by asserting that the individuals themselves, each in his own personal and sovereign right, enter into a compact with each other. The framers incorporated this right of self-government through ratification conventions, manifesting man's authority to determine his own governance under which the other natural rights of life, liberty, and property are protected.
While ratifying conventions allowed for the people to directly enter a social contract, the bloc opposing the Constitution, the Anti-Federalists, argued that this completely eradicated state authority. Anti-Federalists further feared that by relinquishing authority to a national government, the states would no longer be able to adequately protect the rights of their citizens.
They believed, based on Baron de Montesquieu's The Spirit of Laws, that state governments, being smaller and more localized than the national government, would be better able to perceive and understand the needs of their citizens. These concerns were furthered in the paper Brutus I, which explained that too large a government would become tyrannical, as it did in Greece and Rome. This fear of a tyrannical government prompted the Anti-Federalists to push for a national bill to safeguard the rights of the people.
While Brutus understood that, in creating a social contract, the people must give up certain rights, he asserted that it is not necessary for this purpose that individuals should relinquish all of their natural rights, and that the rights of conscience and the right of enjoying and defending life should not have to be surrendered.
The bloc in favor of the Constitution, the Federalists, did not believe a Bill of Rights was necessary to protect natural rights. Alexander Hamilton insisted in Federalist 84 that individual rights were not only implicitly protected in the body of the document, but were also ensured under most state constitutions. The Federalists also countered the argument that small state governments could more effectively protect natural rights through James Madison's assertion in Federalist 14 that the national government will act as the guardian of our commerce and other common interests, while the states will govern on a more local level.
In response to the concern that ratifying conventions eliminated state authority, James Madison wrote to George Washington that to give a system its proper validity and energy, a ratification must be obtained from the people, and not merely from the ordinary authority of the legislature. The Federalist view revolved around this idea that a government of the people must draw its authority directly from the people, which was succeeded through ratification in special conventions. The framers challenged state authority in an attempt to give power to the people. The original Amandla awaited. Thank you.
For fun.
So, what is, I don't understand the special ratifying conventions, why these are such a big deal. What's different between a special ratifying convention and state legislature? I mean, they're both popularly elected, right? So why do we need to create a brand new thing just to ratify the Constitution?
One of the main ideas behind this was the fact that the state conventions to ratify would be dissolved after ratification. However, the legislatures would remain intact. So asking the state legislature to pass a constitution which included provisions such as the Supremacy Clause of Article 6, Section 2, which would take away much of their state authority, would be less likely than asking a body of people elected for the purpose of passing the Constitution to ratify it.
Another pro of ratifying conventions would be weeding out corruption in state legislatures possibly. This was seen in the 18th and 21st Amendment, where the 21st Amendment was passed by special state ratifying conventions in an effort to circumvent the state legislatures, which were filled with people who supported the 18th Amendment because it was profitable. So in this effect, the framers weeded out any corruption.
However, the same could be said for the opposite. A few of these states loaded their ratifying conventions with more Federalists in the beginning to further ratification even quicker. So in some ways, it was a way to promote ratification, but not necessarily eliminate corruption per se.
How do the positions of the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists compare to modern society? How would those positions be seen in today's world?
I would say that the Federalist and Anti-Federalist views on the Constitution would be seen in today's society as in, say, the Anti-Federalist would be translated over to what was happening in Oregon with the Bundy brothers, and the Federalist would be more so with the general
In addition to what Michael was saying, we have political parties now that seem to mirror the ideas of the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists, such as the Tea Party, which mirrors the Anti-Federalist idea that the national government should have less of a say in taxes and other such things. And the members like Bernie Sanders, who's running for president, who has more socialist-leaning views, which would mirror Federalist views that the national government should be able to step in and create more laws for states.
We mentioned Brutus in our testimony, and one of his papers proclaimed that certain rights belong to the states and that they should control matters such as education. And in December of 2015, the Every Student Succeed Act passed, which gave states more control over how education was delivered to students rather than the No Child Left Behind Act.
Bringing it into the judicial sphere, with the passing of Obergefell v. Hodges, we see a Federalist perspective, as it was the federal government imposing the legalization of gay marriage over all of the states and taking that in as a federal government jurisdiction. So this is a Federalist view rather than the Anti-Federalist believing that localized concerns should stay with the states.
What criticisms by the Anti-Federalists seem to be the most valid, and why?
The most obvious one is the calling for the Bill of Rights. The Anti-Federalists believed that there had to be certain restrictions on the national government that prohibited them from infringing on certain liberties like the right to freedom of speech, the right to due process, things that would prevent abuse within the government. And so this is one of their most compelling arguments that does in fact get passed and is a reason for ratification in many of the last states that ratified.
New York Anti-Federalist Millington Smith argued that the House of Representatives was too small in the number of representatives, and that is a pressing issue today, as one representative can represent 700,000 constituents versus, an Anti-Federalist view that Millington proposed should represent more local, smaller numbers in order to reflect their views.
And what evidence supporting the Federalist ideas seem to be the most valid?
The Federalist idea that the national government needed more power was definitely most valid at the time because the Articles of Confederation had no way to enforce any legislation, such as legislation that encouraged the states to give land back to the Loyalists who had been abused during the Revolution. So the fact that the Constitution creates the executive enforce these laws is probably one of the strongest arguments of the Federalists.
Why did Rhode Island use town hall meetings as opposed to ratification state conventions?
Rhode Island actually called conventions 11 times, but the state legislature refused to hold them, and so the people were forced to have town hall meetings instead.
Additionally, the Constitution was adopted because 9 of 13 states had accepted it, and George Washington was actually inaugurated as president, and then the Congress sent a letter to Rhode Island saying that if they did not join the Union, they would be a lone, tiny state on their own, and they would probably not survive. And thus, the people felt the need to circumvent their state legislature, which was being contentious, and call these conventions so that they would not end up outside of the Union.
So you guys started out this testimony using what's basically a call and response from a group of African people seeking sovereignty for their own government. What do you think that the people of African descent living in the United States in 1787 would have said about the whole idea that this was a call and response of, whatever you said? I'll speak while you hear us.
What was your question?
What would they have said? What would people of African descent living in the United States at that time have said about your thesis?
They would have agreed with it that the power should be to the people, but the people of African descent back in 1787 were basically slaves, so they weren't exactly citizens, so they didn't really have, even if the power was given to the people, it would not necessarily have been given to them just because they were considered not people.
The idea of a man away from giving the power to the people really started in this country with the Constitution, but it had to be expanded for it to encompass all people through like the 19th Amendment with women's voting and the 13th Amendment outlawing slavery. And we still have steps to go to fully give the power to the hands of the people.
Don't worry. I think you guys did a really good job with lots of participation from everybody, so that was really good. Especially with my question, I think all 5 of you answered it at some point and gave some very good examples. I really liked the visualization of the mirroring between the anti-federalists and federalists, and then Republicans and Democrats today. I think that's a really good way of visualizing it. Very, very powerful. I also like the response with respect to the Bundys and how that's playing out. I also thought that you guys did a good job of answering the question. I knew what your positions were with all of the questions and understood where you were going. Other than that, I don't really have a lot of comments. You guys did great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I thought you guys did a good job too. I would just suggest that if you start answering a question and you kind of get derailed, to just stop, collect yourself, and try to just regroup and get an answer out. That was good that you had us back and you kind of jumped in, I thought, to save it. But don't feel bad, because when I was in We the People in the national competition, I actually froze at one point. And so I know what it feels like, but just try to regroup and then, just I don't think you need to rush through it. Just stop, regroup, and then try to get out whatever it is you're trying to say. Yeah, you guys did a great job.
You guys did a great job too. I would, a couple of just kind of cautionary points. I would not equate federalism with socialism. They're not quite the same. Because, socialism, or whatever variant of it is, some forms of socialism can be very grassroots, local, and reflect like Jeffersonian Republicans.
Well, I was just thinking like Bernie Sanders socialism,
Yeah.
raising the minimum wage nationally.
Nationally, yeah, I would place it, in which case I would place the
Make that a little
emphasis
bit more
on the federalism, and
concise.
not just that, oh, he's a socialist, ergo, because the way it came out was like, so Alexander Hamilton was a socialist?
Okay.
Not really.
That's not what I meant. So
Yeah.
I will be careful with that.
Yeah, so, right, exactly, he would. The other thing, just to pick on Bert, again, Tea Party's not a party, so make sure that you, it's basically a faction of conservatism that has some overlap. They're within mostly the Republican Party, the Tea Party also.
Do they run their own candidates?
No,
No,
there's no, it's deceptive because it's
It's called,
party.
they're called the tea.
Right, but it's referencing the Boston Tea Party and just the idea of, it's an anti-tax thing.
Okay.
So, and it spans, there are other third parties that it spans, like the Constitution Party and the Libertarian Party as well. Now, the last question was kind of throw out there, because I love that intro and I love that conclusion. But it's just the idea that, one of the things that you might get out of this is that there are some people who are very, like, critical race theory view of the Constitution, and they say, well, it really wasn't a document of popular sovereignty because it excluded, the people that were authorized to
Well,
do this.
so
You can argue
Mr.
that it was,
Oh, yeah,
Mr. Oak said that in some of the ratifying conventions there were African Americans voting.
Some.
So that's like interesting,
But
like
also you could
Okay.
say, you could argue that like they didn't view slaves as people, they viewed them as property, so why would you give power to property? That's not what the saying is.
But that kind of
and the
begs
saying
the
is the
question.
saying is not of that time period. It's
Right.
the theory is there.
Well, I understand that, but that's the thing is that there are scholars today, and for a long time, who would argue that it was not a legitimate document of popular sovereignty, because even with all that,
Women were
there
so
were you were not going to find really women in any of these conventions. There were no children either. But
It
I
was
guess
the first step in the right direction though.
It's okay. Yeah, you're right. It is.
That's the idea.
A lot of people, but what I'm saying is that be prepared, because you may have as a judge a very liberal professor of sociology from the University of wherever, and who has written several thousand essays about how rooted in Marxism that say that the Constitution was designed to protect private property of wealthy people and to actually exclude people democratically. There are some great arguments for that. I'm just saying, what I'm saying is that kind of reminded me of that, was that, okay, so you're saying it's a pure democratic document, and I think that in many ways it is, and it really reflects the idea, but in practice, there you may get a judge that will start to hammer you on that, so I would be
You can
prepared.
have some people argue against and some
Yeah.
people argue for.
Exactly, I would do that.
We have more time on that. We should-
Okay.